He accused her of stealing, and he kicked her out. 4 years later, he saw with his own eyes 2 little girls standing next to her. The city outside the office of James Sterling buzzed with light and ambition. But inside the Onyx Tower that housed his global tech empire, everything felt sharp, cold, and controlled. He stood by his massive San Francisco office window, looking out at a skyline that had long since stopped impressing him. His perfectly styled dark hair, his unreadable gray eyes. His tailored suit fit his body like armor. At 38, James was a self-made billionaire, revered in business circles and feared by his competitors. Emotion was inefficient to him, trust was a luxury, and mistakes were unforgivable. The email arrived just before 7 p.m., flagged as urgent by his head of internal audit. Discrepancies in financial reports, flagged transactions, tens of thousands moved discreetly over several months. A preliminary investigation had narrowed the search to someone in his personal circle. When he opened the final attachment and saw the name, Amelia Vance, highlighted in red, something inside him hardened. His jaw tightened, and without stopping to consider alternatives, he grabbed his phone and dialed her number. Amelia arrived at the penthouse that night to find the door already open. She entered cautiously, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor, sensing the tension before she saw him. He was standing in the living room, her name already cold on his lips. "I trusted you," he said without a greeting, "and you've been stealing from me." She stood still, her blonde hair pulled back loosely, her eyes widening with disbelief. "What are you talking about? Don't play innocent," he snapped. "The accounting records show missing funds, transfers traced to your access credentials." She took a step forward, her hand slightly raised, as if approaching a wild animal. "James, I don't know what they found, but I didn't take anything. I never would." "No," he interrupted her. "You're not just anyone. You lived here. You had access to my life, and you used it." His voice cut off, his breath shallow. "You think I would betray you like that? I think the evidence speaks for itself." She stared at him, stunned. For a moment, something flickered behind her eyes. Not anger, not panic, just a quiet devastation. "I thought you knew me better," she whispered. "Clearly not," he replied. The silence that followed was unbearable, the seconds before a storm. She didn't cry, didn't plead. She simply turned and walked to the bedroom, collected her things in a small travel bag, and returned without a word. When she passed him, he didn't move. He didn't ask her to stay. He didn't even look at her. At the door, she paused. "One day, you'll realize what you lost." Then she left. The latch clicked shut behind her, final and resonant. James stood still, his fists clenched at his sides. He didn't talk to anyone else that night. He didn't reread the reports or ask for clarification. He told himself he had done the right thing, cutting the rot before it spread. But something didn't fit. Not guilt. Something colder, heavier. Something like silence. Do you think James's reaction was justified, or did his fear take over? What would you have done in his shoes? What he didn't know was that Amelia hadn't just left with a suitcase that night. She had left carrying 2 lives inside her, still small and silent, growing beneath her heart. And by the time he came to question what had really happened, it would already be too late to stop the story from unfolding. 4 years had passed, but James never allowed himself to go back to that night. He had buried it, as he buried everything that made him feel insecure, underachievements, quarterly results, and endless projects. Amelia's name never crossed his lips, either in public or private. According to the world, she had disappeared, and James had moved on. But something of the silence she left behind had never stopped following him. Not completely. It lingered in the spaces she used to fill, on the untouched side of the bed, in the music she used to play in the mornings, in the way he no longer let anyone get close to him. Now, in the early spring of 2029, James was in Austin for a corporate gala, representing his company's expansion into biotech research. It was the kind of event he had attended 100 times. Stiff conversations, expensive wine, predictable compliments from people who needed his signature. After 3 hours of polite smiles and rehearsed speeches, he slipped out early and walked alone to the sidewalk, phone in hand, ready to call his driver. That's when he saw her. Amelia was under the glow of a streetlight a few yards away, trying to pull a toy out of her bag, while 2 little girls clung to each side of her. At first, James was paralyzed, thinking the resemblance was playing tricks on him, but it wasn't a mistake. It was her. Her posture, the shape of her face, the softness with which she knelt to zip one of the girls' jackets. It was undeniably her and the girls. They were about 3 years old, maybe a little older. Identical. Small, laughing, hugging. Stuffed animals. They both had soft, dark curls and big gray eyes. His gray eyes. He didn't move. He couldn't. The world around him darkened as he stared. His breath caught between his lungs and his throat. One of the girls looked up and stared at him for a fleeting second. She blinked slowly, curiously. Then she looked back at her mother without a word. Amelia straightened up and followed her daughter's gaze. Their eyes met. She didn't gasp. She didn't stumble. She just looked at him with a calm, unreadable expression, as if she had prepared for this moment and was already done with it. James opened his mouth, but no words came out. Before he could find something to say, Amelia gently led the girls to a nearby taxi. She didn't rush. She didn't look back. The car door closed with a soft thud, and a moment later, the taxi pulled away into the night. 2 small faces pressed against the window, watching the city blur around them. James stood still, completely motionless, as people passed him on the sidewalk, unaware that his world had just changed. He wasn't sure how long he was there before his driver approached and asked if he was ready to leave. He felt it slowly, his eyes still fixed on the street where the taxi had disappeared. Something inside him, something he had buried 4 years ago, had just surfaced. And he knew, without needing anyone to confirm it, that he had just seen his daughters for the first time. What do you think was going through James's mind at that moment? How do you think his life will change now? James couldn't sleep that night. He paced his hotel suite, reliving the scene over and over in his mind. Amelia under the streetlight, the twins at her side, the fleeting moment their eyes had met, and the expression on her face. Not of surprise, not of regret, not of anger, just a quiet distance. He could still see the way the little girl had looked at him, the slight, curious tilt of her head, as if she were looking at a mirror that made no sense. He didn't need proof. The girls were his. He knew it in a way that transcended logic and went straight to the part of him that had been empty for 4 years. In the morning, he had made a decision. He didn't contact her directly. He knew she wouldn't answer, not after what had happened. Instead, he hired someone. Discreet, a private investigator he had worked with before. He didn't want surveillance or pressure, just an address, something simple, something human. In 3 days, he had it. A modest row house in a quiet area of Portland. Nothing extravagant. Not the kind of place James imagined Amelia would end up. But maybe that was the point. She had rebuilt her life without him. It was a Tuesday afternoon. He didn't tell anyone at the office. He didn't even tell his driver. He took a rental car, parked at the end of the street, and sat for almost 20 minutes looking at the small front garden, watching toys scattered on the lawn, chalk drawings on the sidewalk, a tricycle lying on its side, a small pair of shoes near the steps. It was a life, a full and beautiful life that he was not a part of. Finally, he got out and walked to the door. When she opened it, she didn't seem surprised. She looked tired, as if she had known this moment would come and had prepared for it. "James," she said simply. "I need to talk to you," he replied. His voice was calm, but inside, everything was shaking. Amelia didn't invite him in. She stepped outside and closed the door softly behind her, the sound of children's laughter muffled in the background. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I saw you. At the restaurant. The girls. They're my daughters," she said, her voice firm. "They're mine too," he said, and she didn't correct him. For a moment she studied him. He looked tired, but not in the same way as when they were together. It was a different kind of exhaustion, as if he had been walking through life on autopilot and had just realized it. "Why now?" she asked. "Because I didn't know," he said. "If I had known." "You didn't want to know," she interrupted him. "You were so quick to believe I was a thief. You didn't even let me speak. I made a mistake. You destroyed everything we had. I was pregnant when you kicked me out, James. I was carrying your children, and you didn't even look back." The words hit him like cold water. He felt it in his chest, a weight so deep it was hard to breathe. "I'm not here to justify what I did," he said after a long pause. "I just want to make things right. Somehow. And what does that look like to you? Money? Lawyers? A press release? No. I want to be their father." Amelia looked down, took a deep breath, and then looked him in the eyes. "They don't know you. They've never even heard your name. You can't just show up and claim a title you never earned." "Then let me earn it," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Let me start." She didn't answer immediately. The door behind her creaked slightly, and one of the girls peeked out. Amelia turned and gently guided her back inside. When she turned back to James, her face had softened slightly. "I don't promise anything, but if you really want to do this, you start with them, not with me. Understand?" "And James," she added, her voice suddenly sharper. "Don't do this halfway. If you come in, you stay in." He nodded slowly. The full gravity of what she meant settled in his bones. This was not a gesture. It wasn't something that could be fixed with a check or an apology. If he wanted to be in their lives, he had to earn it with time, with presence, with patience. She backed toward the door. "Come back on Saturday. We'll be at the park, 2 blocks away, at 10 a.m. Before he could reply, she slipped inside. The door clicked shut behind her. James stood there for a long time, motionless, looking at the place where she had just been. For the first time in 4 years, he felt something unfamiliar. Humility. And beneath that, a glimmer of hope. The playground was small, tucked between 2 apartment buildings with a faded wooden fence and the scent of spring in the air. James arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in jeans and a sweater he hadn't worn in years, not knowing if he was too dressed up or not enough. He stood awkwardly near a bench, hands in his pockets, scanning the area like someone who had wandered into a place meant for someone else. Children ran in circles, their laughter bright and free. Parents chatted nearby while drinking coffee from paper cups. James felt like an intruder, a man out of place, among strollers and sidewalk chalk. Exactly at 10 o'clock, he saw them. Amelia approached with a slow, even step, one hand gently holding each of the girls. They wore matching pastel jackets. Their dark curls bounced with each step, and their little sneakers lit up as they walked. They looked around, wide-eyed, contemplating the playground as if it were a new world. When they reached the gate, Amelia knelt and whispered something to them. Both girls nodded, then cautiously let go of her hands and headed to the sandbox. She joined James on the bench, keeping a little space between them. She didn't speak at first, neither did he. They just sat there, both watching the two girls dig and build with plastic shovels, working silently side by side as twins often do, as if they shared a private language no one else could fully understand. "They still don't know who you are," Amelia said finally. Her voice was low, almost drowned out by the sounds of play around them. "To them, you're just a man on the street, a stranger." "I understand," James said, his eyes still on the girls. "I don't expect anything. You'll have to be patient. They're smart, observant, but they don't trust easily." He nodded. "They're yours." Amelia looked at him sideways. "They're ours. You just didn't want to know before." "I was wrong," he said simply. "And I'm sorry. I can't undo it. But I want to show them something different now." "Show you." Silence settled between them again, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. One of the girls, Sky, Amelia had said in a text message, walked up, looking at James from a distance. He knelt down to her level, careful not to get too close, and smiled. "Hi," he said softly. She didn't respond. She just looked at him with an expression of serious concentration, as if she was measuring the shape of his face, the color of his eyes, the way his voice sounded. "Want some help with your sandcastle?" he asked, pointing to her half-built mound. She nodded slowly. Then she turned and walked back without a word, looking over her shoulder once to make sure he was following. Over the next hour, James sat in the sand, building crooked castles, digging tunnels, and pretending to be amazed whenever they buried a toy and discovered it again. The girls didn't say much, but they didn't walk away. They handed him shovels. They laughed when he made animal noises. They pointed at birds and demanded he guess their names. It wasn't a connection. Not yet. But it was close to a beginning. Amelia watched from the bench, her arms loosely crossed, her face unreadable. But every now and then, she would smile. Not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't help it. When it was time to leave, the girls hugged each other goodbye, as they always did. As they walked away, Grace turned and waved to James. It wasn't a big wave, just a small, tentative one, as if to say, "You passed the first test." Amelia didn't speak as she buckled them into the car. It wasn't necessary. The way she looked at him as she sat in the driver's seat said more than words could have. "You're not forgiven. Not yet. But maybe you're not a stranger anymore." James stood in the parking lot long after the car had driven away, watching the sun filter through the trees, and feeling, for the first time in years, as if something inside him was waking up. Not guilt, not regret. Something better. Something he hadn't felt since before he lost her. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was love. Or maybe it was the beginning of being the kind of man his daughters would one day run to instead of from. Over the following weeks, James began to show up regularly. At the park, at the library where Amelia used to take the girls for story time, and sometimes simply outside their house when invited, sitting on the porch steps with a bag of coloring books or small puzzles he had chosen himself. He never showed up unannounced. He never stayed too long. He let the girls guide him, and Amelia watched him closely, not as a test, but because she didn't know how to stop watching him. For a man who had once shut himself off so easily, James was becoming gentle, intentional, present. At first, the girls treated him like a new neighbor. They asked cautious questions, often. Through Amelia, They were curious about his car, whether he liked frogs or strawberries, whether he could tie his own shoes. But as the visits became longer and more consistent, the tone shifted. James began to become a regular figure, not quite a father yet, but something more than a visitor. They laughed louder when he arrived. They ran to show him their drawings. They climbed into his lap without asking and told him nonsensical stories that had no logic but that lit up his face like a sunrise. Then came the conversation about legal rights. James didn't bring it up. Amelia did. They were sitting on her back porch while the girls napped inside, the baby monitor humming softly between them. A gentle spring breeze moved the curtains behind the screen door. "You need to be on their birth certificates," she said clearly. He blinked, surprised. "I didn't expect you to say that." "I'm not doing it for you," she said. "I'm doing it because they're going to start asking questions soon, real questions, about where you were, why you weren't there, who they are. And when they do, I want the answer to be honest." He swallowed hard. "I want to be there for all of that, not just the easy parts." She nodded. "Then prove it, not just in court, every single day." They filed the documents together. It was clinical, procedural. Signatures, identity verifications, a hearing with a family judge who reviewed the documents and studied both of them, as if they were barely holding themselves up. But when the judge looked up and asked if either of them had anything to add, Amelia spoke first. "I'm not here because I trust easily," she said. "I'm here because I've seen what he's becoming. And I want my daughters to grow up knowing the version of their father who is here now, not the one who left." The judge nodded slowly. "And you, Mr. Sterling?" James cleared his throat. "I was wrong. I acted without thinking, without listening, and I've lost years I can never get back. But I'm here now, and I'll be here tomorrow, and every day after that, because they're mine, and I want to earn the right to be theirs." The judge granted his parental rights that day. There was no fanfare or applause. But James walked out of the courthouse with the kind of quiet, shaky breath that comes when the heart finally starts working again. That night, Amelia allowed him to put the girls to bed. He read them a story about a bear who couldn't hibernate and ended up discovering spring. The girls snuggled up on each side of him, their eyes half closed, their small fingers wrapped around his thumb. When the story was over, Grace asked him if he would come back the next day. "I'll come back," he said softly. Every morning, Amelia was at the door watching. She didn't say a word, but as he turned to leave, she reached out without thinking and lightly brushed his arm. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the first time she had touched him in 4 years, and that meant something. Something neither of them could explain, but both of them felt. Something real, something fragile, something that was beginning. The rain fell at a steady rhythm that afternoon, hitting the windows of James's office as he stared blankly at his computer screen. The city below was blurred and gray, and for once, work couldn't distract him. His thoughts were tangled with memories, the ones he had pushed away for too long. It had been almost 2 months since the court had recognized his parental rights, and everything had changed. The girls now called him Daddy, without hesitation. They made him drawings and ran into his arms when he arrived. But still, something lingered between him and Amelia, something unresolved, and it gnawed at him, more quietly than guilt, but more deeply than regret. Later that week, Amelia showed up unexpectedly at his office. She looked tired, but not upset. She walked in with a folder in her hand and a strange expression on her face. Part hesitation, part resolution. James stood up the moment he saw her, his heart climbing into his throat. She didn't sit down. She simply placed the folder on the desk and pushed it toward him. "I found this when I was going through some old things," she said in a low voice. "It's from the night you accused me." He hesitated. Then he slowly opened the folder. Inside were copies of internal company memos, signed records, and a printed email chain detailing a technical error involving another employee. His eyes scanned the documents, and the truth hit him like a punch to the stomach. Amelia had taken nothing. The missing funds had been part of a miscommunication and an administrative error that someone else had covered up to protect their job. The evidence was there, clear and damning. Not against her, but against the system he had trusted more than the woman he loved. His breath caught as he looked at her. "Why didn't you show me this before?" She crossed her arms, but not defensively. Her voice was calm, even. "Why didn't you ask? Why didn't you listen? And if I had handed you these papers that night, would it have changed anything?" James opened his mouth, then closed it again. The truth hung between them, too bitter for excuses. "I kept them," she continued, "not to prove you wrong, but because a part of me always hoped you would figure it out on your own." He sat down slowly. The weight of what he had done settled more deeply than before. This wasn't just about custody, or rights, or even the lost years. It was about trust, the kind that can't be rebuilt with court orders or scheduled visits. It was about the moment he had chosen fear over faith in someone he once claimed to love. "I was scared," he said finally. "Scared of being wrong, of being used. I let that fear destroy everything." Amelia looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, he saw the pain behind her strength. Not bitterness, not resentment, just a quiet exhaustion. "I had to build a life from nothing," she said, as she carried 2 babies. "Alone. Do you know what that felt like? To be accused of something unforgivable and have no one believe in you?" "I can't fix it," he said in a low voice, "but I swear I'll never doubt you again." She nodded once, slowly. Then, after a moment, she turned to leave. Before she reached the door, she stopped. "The girls are watching us," she said softly. "If we want them to know what love is, we have to show it to them, even if we're still figuring it out." Then she was gone, leaving the door swinging gently behind her. James stood there for a long time, looking at the folder that had the power to change everything. If only he had cared to read it 4 years earlier. But in that moment, he understood something he hadn't understood before. Redemption wasn't just about being present. It was about taking responsibility, not for the outcome, but for the wound. That night, he didn't bring a gift for the girls. He brought a letter, handwritten. To Amelia, not to apologize again, but to tell the whole truth. About his fear, about his failure, and about how he was ready, not just to be a father, but to become someone worthy of the life he almost lost. Do you think Amelia will be able to forgive James completely? What do you think the future holds for this family? Summer arrived softly, and with it, a rhythm that neither James nor Amelia expected to feel again. The girls now sought out James with the same naturalness with which they sought out Amelia. Their days were filled with games and questions, and small rituals that made his presence feel permanent. He had rented a small row house just 10 minutes from her home, not because he needed to, but because he wanted the girls to feel he was close enough to show up for story time, to pick them up from daycare, for the days when one of them woke up with a fever and just needed to be held. James, once a man known only for his skyscraper offices and his control in boardrooms, now spent entire afternoons assembling dollhouses, baking undercooked cookies, and singing terribly out-of-tune lullabies. Amelia, cautious by nature and by habit now, didn't resist his involvement, but she didn't give herself too quickly either. She watched him with a quiet attention, tracking his constancy, his patience, the way he responded to his daughters when things were a mess, or loud, or just human. She noticed how he no longer picked up his phone when he was with them, how he would sit in small plastic chairs and listen to their nonsensical stories as if they were the most important words ever spoken. He wasn't playing at being a father. He was becoming one. Sometimes Amelia stayed for dinner. At first it was practical, a matter of schedules, logistics, convenience. Then, the time would stretch a little longer. She would help clean up. They would share coffee. They would talk cautiously about the girls, about their days, and finally, in low voices, about the past. He didn't defend himself. She didn't accuse. They simply let the air between them settle with the truth that neither had said out loud in years. One night, after the girls had fallen asleep in their matching twin beds, Amelia stood in the doorway. The house was silent, except for the hum of the nightlight and the soft sound of their breathing. James stood beside her, his arms crossed, his expression soft and full of wonder. "She says she dreams of castles now," Amelia whispered, gesturing toward Grace. "Big ones, with windows that touch the sky. I used to think all they'd want from me were answers," James murmured. "But they're stories. They want stories." Amelia turned to him, her face unreadable. "They want you, but they also want security, consistency. For you to be here, not just now, but always." "I will be," he said, "no matter what it takes." She nodded slowly, and for a moment the space between them felt less like a boundary and more like a beginning. Later that week, Grace climbed into his lap and asked him why he didn't live in the same house as them. Her voice was curious, not sad, but the question hit him deeply. He didn't answer immediately. Then Amelia, sitting on the other side of the room folding laundry, looked up and answered softly. "Sometimes adults need time to figure out where their real home is." Grace accepted the answer, snuggling deeper into James's arms, already falling asleep. That night, James stayed a little longer. After Amelia put the girls to bed, they sat on the back steps in silence, the moon peeking out from behind thin clouds. "I used to think love meant making big promises," he said. "But maybe it's just about showing up, quietly, every day." Amelia looked at him. "You're learning." "I'm trying," he said. "You're doing it," she replied. She didn't say more. But when she got up to leave, she didn't walk with the same cautious stiffness as before. Instead, she paused. She looked back once, and she smiled. Not politely, not cautiously, but with warmth. And that small, unexpected smile stayed with him all night, like a door opening after years of being closed. The morning of the girls' 4th birthday arrived with golden light streaming through the windows and the sound of little feet pounding the hardwood floor. The house was already filled with balloons, streamers, and the sweet scent of vanilla cake that James had imperfectly, but proudly, baked the night before. He had never decorated a party in his life, but now he was tying streamers to chairs and blowing up balloons until his hands ached. All because his daughters had asked for the most beautiful birthday ever. Amelia arrived early, carrying a bag full of handmade paper crowns and a box of fresh strawberries. Her eyes lit up the moment she saw what James had done to the living room. It wasn't polished or Pinterest perfect, but it was bright, cheerful, full of care, and real. The girls came running in their birthday dresses, laughing as they spun around and demanded everyone look at the sparkles. They both hugged James first, then ran to Amelia, covering her in kisses and tugging on her to help them put on their crowns. For the first time in 4 years, it felt like a family celebration. Not an arrangement, not a compromise. Real, shared joy. Guests arrived in waves. Neighbors, friends from preschool, Amelia's cousins, and even one of James's oldest friends from college, who had flown in after hearing that something big was happening in his life. The backyard was transformed into a playground with colorful streamers, face paint, small tables, and a bubble machine that ran almost non-stop. The girls bounced between their parents, dragging them into games, handing out stickers, and proudly announcing to anyone who would listen, "That's my daddy, and that's my mommy." James noticed the way Amelia laughed more freely now, the way her eyes lingered on him longer than before, without tensing. How she no longer flinched at closeness or quiet moments. After the games, the cake, and the chorus of happy birthday, the children gathered in a circle on a picnic blanket, and Grace suddenly stood up, holding a folded piece of paper. She whispered something into her sister's ear, who nodded solemnly. "We made a wish," Grace announced, clutching the paper with both hands. "It's for Mommy and Daddy." Skye stood by her side and added, "It's very important." James and Amelia exchanged a look, but said nothing. They waited. Grace carefully unfolded the paper, and with the seriousness only a 4-year-old could muster, she read aloud. "We wish that Mommy and Daddy will live together in the same house, so we don't have to say goodbye anymore." The yard was silent for a moment. Some parents chuckled softly, touched, while others looked away to give space to something so personal and raw. James's heart squeezed. He looked at Amelia, who was blinking rapidly, trying not to cry. Later, after the party was over and the last of the guests had left, James and Amelia sat at the kitchen table. The house quiet again. The girls had fallen asleep next to each other, in a makeshift fort made of sofa cushions and blankets. James held the wish paper in his hand, smoothing it with his thumb. "I didn't ask them to write that," he said softly. "I know," Amelia replied. "It's what they want. What about you?" she said, tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "I never thought we'd come back from what happened, but seeing you with them, seeing you become this man, I think maybe we didn't lose everything. Maybe we just paused." He looked at her. There was no fear on her face, no distance, just clarity and something soft, like a quiet acceptance. "I'm not asking for everything," he said. "Not today. Just a chance to build what they see in us." Amelia got up and walked to the living room, where the girls lay tangled in blankets, their hands still intertwined, even in sleep. She called softly over her shoulder, "Then maybe it's time we stopped living in 2 houses." James didn't move immediately. He just watched her, his heart beating not with panic, but with something softer. Certainty. He got up, walked to stand beside her, and together they looked at their daughters, at the 2 small people who had pulled them from the abyss and, without knowing it, had taught them to try again. There was no big speech, no kiss, no cinematic moment. Just 2 people, standing close, finally ready to share the weight of the past and the promise of what could still be. It was quiet, and it was enough. Call to action. What did you think of the story? Share your favorite moment and what you believe is the most valuable lesson that James learned.